Great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 10th meeting of the Town of Arlington Redevelopment Board. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Rachel Zemberry. I am the chair of the Redevelopment Board. Could the other members of the board please introduce themselves?
Steve Revelak.
Eugene Benson.
Shana Corman-Houston.
Ken Lau.
And we also have joining us this evening the Director of the Department of Planning and Community Development, Claire Ricker.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to our first agenda item this evening, which is a review and approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting. Let's see if there are any additions or corrections, starting with Steve.
None.
Jean?
None.
Shana?
None.
Ken?
None.
And I don't have any as well. Is there a motion to approve as submitted?
So motion.
Second.
We'll take a vote, starting with Steve.
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
Shana?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. Agenda item number 1 is closed. We'll now move to our next two agenda items, which is a discussion of discussion of board articles for 2025 town meeting. To set expectations, this is not a hearing. The board will be having a working session together with one of the citizen article petitioners, because we were not able to finish the discussion at our last meeting due to the time. And then the board will be conducting a working session for the ARB town meeting warrant articles. After that, there will be an open forum, and that is the full agenda for tonight. So let's go ahead and move to our agenda item number 2, which is the discussion of the proposed Affordable Housing Overlay District warrant article. We had a presentation at our last meeting, so I think if there is anything brief that you would want to mention to the board, I think that there was a new item submitted, which is the proposed text, I believe.
Yep.
The proposed main motion. Again, we've all had a chance to review it, so if there's anything you wanted to top line, I think what I'd like to do is spend the majority of our time with the board being able to provide feedback. But Sanjay, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. It might be useful.
And I'm so sorry, could you please just introduce yourself for the record?
Yes.
Name, address, and
Sanjay Newton, Ottawa Road. I guess it's relevant. I'm a precinct 10 town meeting member.
Thank you.
I think maybe perhaps just for the public and for people who are here, we could just cover 2 of the slides from that presentation we gave last time.
Perfect.
Maybe slide 10 to remind people of sort of the projects, the kind of projects that we're talking about. These are the 3 projects ongoing and in the past in Arlington that would qualify under the kind of proposal that we're talking about here, right? So this is the past projects that would qualify. All developed by, and sorry, I should have also introduced, I also have with me Erica Schwartz, who is the Executive Director of the Housing Corporation of Arlington. So, yeah. And so Erica could talk much more about these particular projects because they are hers. But these are the kind of projects that we're talking about, and you can see here, right, there's a component of town subsidy that goes into them. There is but the majority of the funding comes through state and federal subsidies. And the other thing that's worth noting is that all 3 of these, is that correct, Erica, were developed under 40, using 40B process?
Capital Square was an acquisition, so not that one.
So not that one.
Actually, no. So 10 Sunnyside, we used 40B. Downing Square preceded me, but I believe that was a special permit. But none of them, so those 2 new construction projects did not align with the existing zoning. And we had to come before either the ARB or the zoning board.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. So that's there. And then if you wanted to just go to the, I believe it's the very last slide, which just has the summary again to remind people of, we submitted the full text, but there's a lot of text there. This is the summary, right? At least 70% of rental units restricted as affordable, with ACMi limits that match the rest of our thing. Mixed use are allowed in business and industrial, and then required in the commercial centers, which the text has as B3, B5, all districts, and there are added building heights that are detailed in the table there. Again, in the interest of time, I don't want to go over much more than that, but I thought good, since we have other members of the public.
Great, thank you very much, I appreciate that. So what I'd like to do is open this up to the board for any questions and initial feedback now that we have the information about the proposed warrant article, and I'll start with Ken.
When I look at this, it generally makes the nonprofit developer feel more at ease because it's very similar to 40B, and it makes it such that it doesn't seem like it's by right, essentially, more by right. So what does that do for you as a nonprofit developer to make you should get funding from the state, as opposed to if you just went with a friendly 40B or 40B period? Would this help with the funding aspect of it? Am I clear on this part? Or?
Yeah, completely clear. It wouldn't necessarily help access additional funding based on what the zoning is, but it would help possibly save money in a project by providing a lot more clarity and less risk in what the process would be to get to the zoning. Where HCA did have a successful experience with securing our 40B zoning with Sunnyside, but we don't see there's other really sound nonprofit and for-profit affordable housing developers. This is their business. This is what they do. They build affordable housing. They're not coming to Arlington, and from the research that some of the working group members did, one reason for that is because there's a lack of certainty and clarity on the timeline and how the process might go. And so this proposal would save time and therefore also money in a project by adding that certainty, reducing the risk of the lack of certainty of knowing how a process is going to proceed. This would have, I think, more certainty than a 40B process currently, and possibly be shorter.
My follow-up question is, are there any other towns or cities that have similar proposals like what you're doing here?
Yes, I feel like, sorry, yes.
Sure. Cambridge is the most notable one that has an affordable housing overlay. Obviously, theirs is structured differently because they are a different municipality, but they have had a lot of success in seeing affordable housing developed. And actually, your colleague Steve can actually probably tell you even more than I can in detail about the success they've had and some of the more details about how theirs differs from what we're proposing here. But we did spend a lot of time looking at what Cambridge has done because they have been successful. Obviously, not all of it applied to here. They were talking about different scale of building, obviously, than we are in a lot of places.
Any other towns besides Cambridge?
I believe Somerville also has one as well. If I recall correctly, theirs is newer, and so they have not had as much development done under it yet. And I believe those are the two that are in place now. Mr. Revlak, do you remember? Does North Reading have one?
I do not know.
I wasn't aware of that one, but I'll go look it up after. Okay.
That's a half an hour.
Okay, thank you. I have several items I wanted to mention. So, you just mentioned 2 cities as opposed to 2 towns that are of the scale of Arlington. My biggest concern is the scale of this running across the entire town. I'm specifically concerned about the impact on the business districts and the industrial districts that the town, through all of the work we've done with MBTA communities, we've heard from the town we need to protect and enhance our business districts, and to not require mixed-use development, and to add residential to the industrial districts, where, you know, the town meeting has been very clear that is not a desired use in the way that we have created our zoning bylaws, is a real concern to me. I think that there are some other things in here that I also have a concern about. Some of the uses, including single-room occupancy buildings, which aren't currently permitted in Arlington. The allowance of, the range of different types of projects that would be allowed in every single residential district. This contradicts other areas of the bylaw, for example, where we eliminated the ability to create new single-family and two-family dwellings in the business districts. That, is a conflict.
I think, to that one specifically, I realized looking over the draft again today that I think we drafted that the intention was to do exactly what you're saying and exclude, not allow them in any more places than they are currently allowed. So I think that is a drafting error.
That's good to know. Thank you.
On our part.
Yep. And then I have a concern about the heights that are proposed as well. I think that they're too aggressive. We spent a lot of time on the allowable heights in the creating the multifamily neighborhood in Broadway and Mass Ave district. This exceeds those in every case. There are some other nuanced details and some questions I have around why we would redefine certain things in this overlay district that are defined elsewhere in the zoning bylaws, such as site plan review, solar energy requirements, et cetera. But I think fundamentally I have a challenge with the scope of this, and that's going to be really hard for me to get beyond.
Excuse me. So generally speaking, I'm actually comfortable with the scope of this, but there are a fair number of sort of nuanced questions I have, and I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time for a wide range of clarifying, and Rachel, maybe you can speak to this, a wide range of clarifying questions, or if we want to table that for in writing. I've got a fairly wide range.
Sure. So, I think if, to start off, perhaps you have some broad feedback, much like Ken and I were able to provide, and then if time allows, we can get into more of the specifics with questions.
Yep. Let's see. I had the same question as Rachel about single family and two family dwellings. So good to hear that was a drafting error. Let's see. I was wondering, in the maximum height chart, it appears that larger lots are requiring or are permitting less height.
The reason that came to be is that the sort of, if you go back to the original presentation, which we don't need to do, Claire, the original presentation, the sort of baseline for what we proposed was we're going to base our heights on the underlying zoning district and the heights that are allowed in the underlying zoning district, and we're going to allow an additional 2 stories, right? And so that is the way that those underlying zoning districts allow height. It is shorter for larger lots, if I'm remembering correctly. And so that's what this proposal does. It says whatever you were allowed under base zoning plus 2. I would note that, in talking to lots of people, and I think Erica went and did presentations for a couple of different community groups, and people definitely were feeling nervous about some of those heights, and so that is why we scaled back, right, in the R0, R1, R2 districts from what was originally there. We did feel, Nick, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Sort of in the same vein, I was wondering about setbacks, front, side, rear setbacks. I think what is it? It appears that in theory, one could have a 0 side yard setback in a residential district. Here, let's see, that would be 5.10.5.B. In any event, so I may be misreading, but I would just say, make sure that whatever.
I don't believe
Yep.
that was the intention.
Yeah. So I would say that that allowing, setbacks are certainly something that that I think taking a liberal approach on is fine, while respecting the surrounding district. Open space is another that I think taking a liberal approach on, while respecting the surrounding district, is something that I would suggest you look at. Let's see. In terms of building height, I actually think going the ability to do things like there's a drafting, the language in 5.10.9 makes it appear that you wouldn't necessarily be able to use dormers to get an existing story, and I would advocate for revisiting that. Things that maximize the housing while respecting the surrounding community, I think are, I would strongly advocate for. And nearly done. In terms of changes that can be made to a project. So down when you're talking about installation of features, that changes to features to bring a building up to accessibility code. I would even broaden that. There's a fair bit of new code around sustainability that the state is now requiring for affordable housing projects, projects with public money for affordable housing, and making allowances for the physical design of the building to accommodate the sustainability requirements. I think is going to be a really important thing. In Boston, for example, that has been a major problem. The design guidelines as a limiting factor in achieving sustainability guidelines. I think that's all I have for now, but by and large, I think this is very valuable in term, you know, how Erica spoke to having a clear path. I think that's a very important goal, and I appreciate your work on this.
Great, thank you very much. Jean?
Yeah, I was glad to see this, and obviously this took about, 2 years of work to get to this point, and lots of people, and we've had about, 48 hours to read it and to look at it and to think about it. And while I like the concept of how can we do things with our zoning to make it easier for affordable housing to get located in town, this rips out almost everything in the zoning bylaw, and I think it goes way too far. And I think it can be pulled back in a number of ways and still provide many more opportunities than currently exist for affordable housing to be built in town. I haven't talked to any of my colleagues about this, but I'll repeat what some of them said. I agree with Rachel that I think I would go with what we established in MBTA communities for height on Broadway and Mass Ave and on the side streets, rather than this. It's not that much different, but I think it was something that was vetted and was accepted by town meeting and that we felt comfortable with. I also have concerns about allowing this in the industrial district, which we've articulated to the group in the past. I have some concerns about this in the business district, and let me talk about that. I like the idea of allowing them in the business district if they're mixed use, with mixed use on the ground floor. I will not just limit it to the B3 and the B5 districts, because I looked at the zoning map today and there are so many places for B2, B2A, and B4 where it would be really appropriate to have a mixed-use building, activate the streetscape with retail, something like that on the first floor. And I think just limiting it to the B3 and B5 does a real disservice to the town and to our opportunity to attract more business to the town. I also do not think it's a good idea to say that a community service facility makes something a mixed-use building. If you look at our bylaw, at least the way I read the definition of mixed use, a community service facility, and I looked up the IRS definition in the guidance, is pretty much going to be for people in the building. Yes, people from outside the building can use it too, but since it has to be predominantly for people at 60% AMI or less, according to the IRS guidance, it's not going to be the same as having a store or something else, retail establishment, coffee shop, something like that. So I would be delighted to have the community service facilities on the second floor of those buildings, but to have true commercial of some sort on the first floor of the building with the same percentages that we've done in some other places. As I said, you basically ripped out all of the things that limit places from getting built in town. And some of them I think was appropriate to get rid of, but some of them I don't. For example, getting rid of the traffic visibility thing, which says on corners in residential neighborhoods, you have to have 20 feet so drivers and pedestrians can see around the corner. There seems to be no reason to get rid of that, and good safety reasons to keep that instead of getting rid of it. I'm a little bit concerned about getting rid of lot frontage, because what this would basically allow is a very tall, narrow building on a very narrow lot. I'm not sure that's the smartest way to do something. I haven't thought through the whole open space piece yet, but I will point, and I won't go through everything because I have numerous comments on every page. But on one hand, it says no open space, and yet later on, it gives us the ability to waive the open space requirements on balconies. So I think nobody at the end, after these pieces were all put together, said, oh, maybe we don't need this one because we got rid of open space somewhere else. What else? There are some part, you completely got rid of the section 8.2 affordable housing, but I think there are some parts of it that would be very nice to retain for this, giving the town a little bit more control or at least oversight of what's going on. So I don't think it was a good idea to get rid of all of 8.2. On reducing the parking requirements to a half, I think that makes sense on Mass Ave and Broadway where there's rather frequent public transit service. I don't think it makes a lot of sense in other parts of the town where there's either no transit service whatsoever or very, very infrequent transit service. So I would sort of modify that to say if it's within a quarter mile of a bus stop or something like that. Let's see, what else did I have? It doesn't, we have to do something about signs. It doesn't mention what the sign rules are going to be. We have to do something about shadows. It doesn't mention what happens if this building was shadow somebody else's solar array, for example. And we don't have anything about that, but when we have reviewed buildings in the past, one of the things that we've asked for is a shadow study to see whether it would block someone else's solar array. We haven't seen that yet, so I'm not sure what we would do if that happened, but it's not there. My big thing, and I'm going to take a little disagreement with you. Overall, I like the concept, but I think it needs work in all those ways. I think it should require a special permit and not as of right, because there are so many things like shadows, like signs, like parking, like how it fits into the neighborhood, things like that, where if you get rid of special permit and make it as of right, we lose our ability to deal with those type of things. And I know we had to make it as of right for MBTA communities because that's what the state law said. The state law is there because so many communities use special permits to keep things out. We have never done that during the 8+ years that I have been on this board, either on this board or even, the HCA projects that have been friendly for DBs. And I think it doesn't lend a lot more uncertainty, because if it was, we wouldn't have special permits coming to us all the time and people all the time saying, we want this, and they come up and we end up saying yes, either at the first meeting or the second meeting. So I think there's a lot here. I think it can be done, but I think it needs a lot of work and tweaking, and I didn't get through, but those are my big picture comments.
Great, thank you, Jean. Steve, I will turn it over to you next.
Okay, so as I've was involved in working on this, I have one answer to a question that Mr. Newton raised, and I have one question for the petitioners. So the answer to the question, Cambridge's AHO, I followed it fairly closely during the first year when it was in existence, and I went to some of the hearings to sort of see how it worked out. This was before it was amended to allow greater heights on the main streets and in squares. But the first year it put, I think, 350-ish units in the development pipeline. So they've had success with it. My question regarding mixed use, and I'm wondering, how does the funding work? If you're getting money for building affordable housing, can that also be applied to just a regular old commercial space?
So no, the way the funding works for the kinds of developments that this would overwhelmingly allow, I suppose there might be some other kinds, but typically the funding is the low-income housing tax credit. That would be the source that would work with the types of developments we're talking about. It's very complicated, but no, that funding doesn't fund that space. That doesn't directly support the affordable housing, or to a lesser extent can support, like Jean was mentioning, some kind of related service for those low-income tenants. So that's what makes it trickier to do mixed use, because it's just a little more risk for an affordable housing developer whose main business, it might not be retail space. You're having to make sure you can fill that retail space, because if it's empty, that's income you need to make the building work, and it's just a little riskier. So it's always a little trickier to do that.
Just to add, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken, so that commercial space becomes an additional liability for whoever the developer is, right? It's not just that it's not funded through subsidy, but they have to guarantee that. There has to be some sort of guarantee of the funding in that.
Right. I mean, all your investors are going to look at the budget, and if that's income you're counting on, then they're going to assume that you're receiving that income, and that's income that the investors and your lender are going to assume that you need to continue having to make everything add up. So yes, to a certain extent, yes.
Great, thank you. Steve?
Nothing else.
Okay. So we had about half an hour set aside for this. I think you've had some good feedback about some of the areas where the board is in support and some of the concerns. I think we probably haven't even gotten to all of them this evening, but I hope that provides you with some feedback. Obviously, we'll hold a full hearing on this proposed warrant article. Claire, do you have the date when this hearing?
The hearing is currently scheduled for Monday, March 24th.
So there is time between now and then.
Great. And I just wanted to clarify, right, as we discussed that, so the board will be taking on doing.
No. As we stated before, the board will not be taking on this article. The board has put forth the articles that we were very clear about that at the last meeting. The articles that the board is putting forth have already been identified, and this is not one of them. We were out way in front of the few that were proposed by other groups that the board decided to take on. The board voted on it ahead of the warrant period closing, which included one by the Department of Planning and Community Development and several from the Zoning Board of Appeals. We were very clear on that in the last meeting.
I did not understand that, and just to be frank, there, the bylaw would require us to notify, right, every property owner in town, and that's just outside the scope of what we're capable of as a citizen.
Understood, and we did address that at the last meeting, that was not something that, again, the board has not had the sufficient time to understand, come to any type of agreement, and to be willing to move this forward under the ARB.
Okay, I thought that's what we were here to discuss tonight, but okay.
Nope. All right. Thank you very much. All right, so with that, we will move to our next agenda item, which is the review of the draft warrant article language for the redevelopment board articles. So I'll turn it over to Claire. Thank you and the department for putting together the draft language and this memo.
Sure, thank you. So this is a memo and main motion draft language that was put together by staff to help the board to finalize, to discuss and hopefully get closer to final on main motion language for each of the warrant articles that the board at least is advancing at this year's town meeting. We are required to have main motion language available to the public per our legal ad that was published last Thursday and this Thursday. Draft language of the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw says the legal ad will be available beginning on Thursday, March 13th. It may be viewed at the front counter of the Department of Planning and Community Development or at the Robbins Library. So pursuant to that, we're going to discuss these board warrant articles this evening so that we can nail down some of this language for public review.
Great, thank you very much. Before we jump into that, I just want to start with, I think at the outset of the memo, you outlined the schedule
Yes.
for the hearing dates. And I believe that one of the questions that the board had as of the last meeting was when the ARB report was actually due to town meeting. Is that something that the moderator has confirmed, or could we confirm that? I'm happy to reach out.
Sure, we can confirm
Okay.
that. It's nothing the moderator has confirmed so far, and in fact, the official warrant has not yet
Sure.
been published, but.
Okay. Because I think that was the only question that the board had was with regard to the end of the schedule. As we get towards the review and approval of the memo, just to make sure that we have enough time in the schedule for that. We may need to add in an additional meeting. Sometimes we've had to meet on a Wednesday or, squeeze that in some other way. So I don't know when that will be determined, but that may affect the end. Okay,
Great.
great. Any other questions from the board or comments on the schedule on page, on the second page of the memo? Jean?
My only concern with the schedule is I believe there are 9 citizen warrant articles, and I think the schedule has us taking them all in one day, which I think is a lot.
I think that's fair. So let's take a look at this. We have the 24th and the 10th for the ARB articles. I believe a few of these citizen articles are actually on the 24th. Claire, is that correct? In terms of H through N?
That is, in terms of H through N, that I believe is that map night? The night that we're going to talk about so there are a certain number of warrant articles, citizen and ARB, that will include recommendation to town meeting, or at least a motion to town meeting asking for the zoning map to be updated along with the change to the zoning. So for example, B1 through B2A, we talked about there being main motion language related simply to that article, but it also requires a map change, and so it is included on along with the affordable housing overlay, which we just heard that includes a map change on I believe it starts on the night of the 24th. So we did combine at least any article that also requires a map change will be heard together on the 24th. The citizen warrant articles at this point we have scheduled that don't include a map change. We have scheduled for the 17th.
So that is 6 articles or 7 articles?
I believe it's 6.
So we have 6 articles that night because
Okay.
3 of them require a map change and they will actually be on the 24th.
3 of the citizen articles require a map change?
One is a petition. He came in front of us
Right. What are the other 2?
the one we just heard,
Oh, okay.
and I believe that there was one other, if I'm not mistaken.
So there's the affordable housing overlay, there's the amendment to the zoning bylaw to add 17 Palmer to the MBTA neighborhood district. There are only 2.
Okay, so it would be 7 on the night of the
That'd be fine.
Okay.
17th. Okay, great. All right, any other questions or comments on the schedule? All right, so let's move to, I think the first two, Article A and B and H, are the three that we probably need to spend the most time on. So let's go ahead and start with the accessory dwelling units proposed main motion. So Jean, I know that you had already taken a look and we have as one of the exhibits for tonight's meeting your proposed changes. So perhaps what we could do is start by having you take us through the proposed modifications that you've made to the language prepared by the department.
Okay, so on Article A, I would not propose making any change to the amendment, because all this is proposed adding as defined in Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, which
I'm sorry, you would propose not making a change to the definition?
at all,
Okay,
because all it's proposing to do is adding as defined in MGL Chapter 40A. And we don't need that and shouldn't need that for a couple of reasons. One is part of the definition just sort of makes no sense for a town, because it says, subject to such additional restrictions that may be imposed by a municipality, including but not limited to additional size restrictions, blah, 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 blah. And that's really telling towns what to do, not us telling us what to do. The other two parts of the definition in 40A that are not in our definition are found in 5.10 itself, and those two are maintain a separate entrance and not larger in gross floor area than half the floor area or 900 square feet. So it seems to me what you end up doing is creating some confusion about why have we added this little phrase which just replicates what's already in our bylaw and yet adds this thing that was an instruction to towns and not what the town should have as a definition. So I just thought adding as defined in MGL Chapter 40A was sort of like a broken suspenders in a belt and suspenders.
adding a circular reference?
Yeah, so I didn't think that was necessary and potentially counterproductive. The second thing,
Sorry, can we just take them one at a
Yeah.
time? I think that would, any concerns with Jean's deletion? Steve?
There's, my initial reaction was that for non-lawyerly people like me, a pointer to the state law would actually be helpful, but I do, hearing your explanation, I'm okay with the omission.
I am as well. Any other concerns?
Okay.
Okay, let's do that.
Hi, Gene, can you use the mic? Please.
sorry,
Much better.
Yeah, pull it all the way
I'll
forward.
keep it very close like a close friend.
Thank you, Jean.
The second one I deleted was the addition that was added to D, where it currently says no more than one accessory dwelling unit is allowed per principal dwelling unit. This added except as permitted by special permit if the ZBA acting pursuant to 3.3 finds the creation of additional units not substantially more detrimental. Well, that would make sense if we allowed more than one dwelling unit per principal dwelling, but we don't in the bylaw. The bylaw is very specific that we only allow one ADU per principal dwelling unit. So even though the wording that they added is wording in Chapter 40A, for us it's unnecessary because we don't allow more than one. And it's an option for the town whether to do this. And if we wanted to do this, we would need to amend some other part of the bylaw to allow more than one unit of ADU per unit, which we haven't done. And if the purpose of what we're doing here is simply to bring us into compliance with the changes in 40A for ADUs, I think this is unnecessary unless we want to allow more than one ADU, but I don't think there's been any hue and cry from people who want to have more than one ADU on their property.
Great, thank you, Jean. Any concerns with that proposed deletion? Steve?
From my reading of the regulations, I think there is a clear contemplation that a community could allow multiple ADUs per dwelling, and they even say in the regulations that a non-protected use ADU, that's the second or more, shall be allowed by would have to be allowed by special permit. The picture I have in mind is someone with like a single family dwelling that has space to put 2 ADUs and would like to do that. I think I would like to see the special permit, a second one allowed by special permit. I think that part is worth keeping.
Other thoughts? I just want to say that I agree with Jean. I think our intent here was to bring this into compliance, not to change our the decisions that were made by the town. But if the other board members, feel similarly, then we should discuss that. Ken?
I agree with Jean. This whole thing was just to bring in compliance with the state law, and by allowing multiple ADUs, it's not what we agreed upon. If we want to do that, we should bring it up as such, as an amendment, not slide it in as a alignment with the system. My whole agreement is we just align with state, and that's it, pure.
Shana?
Excuse me. I do think multiple ADUs is something that would be interesting to contemplate, but I agree that's not what we agreed to do here at this time.
Great, thank you. So I think the consensus is that we would remove that section, but I will note for future discussion of the board, the discussion of whether in the future we would want to perhaps propose the ability to create multiple ADUs.
And those
Jean,
were,
back to you.
Those were the only changes I made. I think the rest of it was appropriate to have to meet the requirements of the state law.
Great. Steve, any additions or corrections?
So I had been communicating with Ms. Suarez regarding a few things that the AGO said during in their review of our last ADU bylaw. One was a question about a special permit requirement for within 6 feet of the property line. The AG advised us to consult with town council, and I believe town council's opinion was that requiring a special permit for ADUs within 6 feet of a lot line was a reasonable restriction. The other place where we could where we may have a special permit requirement in conjunction with an ADU is the large addition provision. But since that provision is also applicable to single family dwellings, I think that would also likely meet the reasonableness standard. So I think we're okay in those two areas.
Great, thank you, Steve. Any other thoughts? Jean, are you in agreement with?
I'm in agreement with Steve.
Great, thank you. Shana?
I am as well.
Ken?
No, I have no other changes.
Okay. All right, so I think we are good to move forward with the proposed modifications to Article A. We'll move to Article B, which is the Transportation Demand Management Plan. And Claire, I'll turn it over to you because I know that this is one that you drafted. We have not had a lot of time devoted to discussing this one yet as a board.
Great, thank you. So when we were discussing board articles for advancement, it came up, the question was raised, what we're going to do something about residential TDM. And so I took a look at our 6.1.5, which is the TDM parking reduction in certain zones, and through some research determined that the TDM for projects with less than 10 residential units and or less than 3,000 square feet of commercial space may be more easily, may be able to more easily implement TDM were we to not have it be, have them determine 3 of the existing methods that are in place currently in our zoning bylaw that potentially they could employ at least 2 of the TDM methods. We have talked a lot about unbundling parking, and that seems like something that is feasible on these smaller projects, and also adding another method, which is to be located within approximately an 1/8 mile of a transit stop, could be another method employed to achieve a transportation demand management plan. With that, I suggested this main motion language, certainly up for discussion by the board.
Great, thank you very much for drafting this so that we can have this discussion. We'll start with Steve for any feedback.
Well, actually, I'd suggest letting Mr. Benson go first since he suggested a number of amendments.
Thank you very much, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I suggested a number of amendments. One was just the simple one. It refers to single occupant vehicle, but the technical term is single occupancy vehicle, so I changed that. The second was, and it's easy to make this mistake when you're writing something. It says all projects with more than 10 residential units, and later it says projects with less than 10 residential units. So it doesn't say what the situation is for projects with 10 residential units. So we needed to do something about that. The second is for both the more and the less, it then uses the and/or. And so the general rule is not to use and/or, although people do it all the time, because it comes back in some cases where you don't know what it means. Let's take this one, for example. All projects with more than 10 residential units. Oh, and the other problem was it said less than 3,000 and the other one said less than 3,000. And I think the first one intended to be more than 3,000. So let's take the one that said projects with less than 10 residential units and or less than 3,000 square feet. Does that mean they could have 20 residential units and less than 3,000 square feet? It's completely unclear when you use the and/or which one it means. So I figured we needed to do something to clear those up. So part of what I proposed was there's no need to put in projects with more because we're just going to define what projects with less get, and then all the other projects get what's on the list, so we don't need to have both of them. I did add something for everyone's consideration as a baseline that people have to request a transportation demand management plan. And I put this in here so that we can have a discussion about it. If you look at the literature, the federal literature on this, they say that the largest percentage of people are willing to walk up to a 1/4 mile to get to a transit stop, a bus stop usually. I think it was about somewhere between 70 and 75% of people are willing to walk up to a 1/4 mile to get to a transit stop. So I thought it would make sense for us to put in as a baseline that a place needed to do to request a TDM, to put in that it would need to be located within 1/4 mile of a bus stop or a subway station. There are many of those in Arlington, but it would exclude certain parts of Arlington that have neither bus stations nor subway stations, so I put it in there for people's consideration. The other major change that I made is for when it was the projects, I wrote, except projects with fewer than 10 residential units and with less than 3,000 square feet of commercial, so it's clear that they have to have fewer than both in order to take advantage of that. And 1/8 of a mile is 660 feet, so I changed the 600 to 650 because if you look at the federal research on this, when you get from a 1/4 mile to 1/8 of a mile, the number of people who are willing to walk 1/8 of a mile to a bus stop goes up over the number of people willing to work a 1/4 mile. So I thought it would be interesting to have that, but at this point, it's not helpful in my opinion, to walk to a bus stop where the bus doesn't run 7 days a week, or it runs just once an hour, or it doesn't, or it stops at 4 in the afternoon, which is why I used to take the bus to LYT station, and now I drive a lot. So I added in this, be located within 660-foot walk of a subway station or of a bus stop with a scheduled bus service of at least once every 30 minutes, 7 days per week between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. And that is not as frequent as the 77 bus, so it would clearly cover the 77 bus. As of the moment, it would not cover any other bus in Arlington. There's not one other bus other than the 77 that meets this criteria. That's not the only criteria, right? It's just that's just an option that they could meet. So I changed that. I added the bus frequency because it seemed appropriate. Those are the changes I made. I also am not sure why small projects only need to use 2 rather than 3, but I left that in there for discussion. That was it.
Great, thank you, Jean. So Steve, now we'll move to you for your thoughts on Jean's modifications and the base language created by the
Okay.
and it sounds like we're gonna switch out our mics too.
All right, gotta keep those batteries fresh. Okay, sure.
It was me, I did it.
All right, so I'll circle back to Mr. Benson's comment. One of the things I would like, or I would suggest you consider, there have been cases where we have approved TDM plans using measures that were not listed in the bylaw. So, for example, providing charging facilities for electric bicycles, 1500 Mass Ave, that one comes to mind. I think that one would be worth including. I have mixed feelings about predicating TDM on the availability of a bus line. My employer is not located in Arlington and they are nowhere near a bus stop, but they do hit at least 3 of the TDM options in our current bylaw. And so I think, the goal is to reduce reliance on single occupancy vehicles, but there are, buses are an effective way to do that. But so are bicycles and bimodal. Most of the time, I frequently see the 76 riding around Lexington with a bike on the front rack. So that means someone is doing, a combination of both. So I would not make proximity to a bus route a gating criteria, but I would list it as one of the additional ones.
Can I ask a question before you go to your next item? Is the limiting rather than, to your point, rather than the gate, are you in agreement with number 9, the proximity, or would you like to look at that further?
Well, for number 9, I would like to see 9 without the frequency, and with a quarter mile. So
that could be in lieu of the gate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and the reason being a quarter mile, that is a 5-minute walk. A typical person walks at around 3 miles an hour. And also, I would like to see the 9 be applicable to the business districts on Broadway, which it would not be with a 8-mile. Or actually, it would not be because of the frequency constraints. The 87 doesn't quite run fast enough.
Great, thank you. Did you have other comments, Steve?
That's it.
Okay. Shayna?
Steve pretty much captured all of my comments, except I would tweak his comment for number 9, that I would keep 7 days per week as a timing requirement and drop the 30 minutes and the hours of the day. So drop the gating requirements up in the paragraph at the top, and then in number 9, change to quarter mile 7 days a week.
Great, thank you, Shayna. Ken?
I pretty much agree with my fellow board members, Stephen and Jen. I just want to add a couple of questions here. When they say provide a guaranteed emergency ride home, that just means that they get refunded for an Uber ride? I mean, you're not going to call up your boss and have him come pick you up. It's just a guaranteed, be reimbursed for Uber or something along those lines. So I just wonder if we can make that a little clearer. And then this is provide transit pass subsidies. This provide transit pass period, or we just gonna give you $1 for your transit pass. I don't think it's clear enough. What does the rest of the board think?
So, I think transit pass subsidies, I think is relatively clear. It's a benefit that I've had at several workplaces, and it just says on the list of benefits, we'll give you $10 a month.
They get the whole pass then.
Yeah, well,
Oh,
no,
no, they
show us your
apportion.
pass. Show us your pass and we'll give you $10 a month, or whatever. But I agree with you about the emergency ride home, that it needs clarification.
Great. I am also in agreement with what was proposed in terms of removing the 1/4 mile walk gate and updating 9 to be within 1/4 mile walk of a subway station or bus stop. I think that the hours and frequency being limited down to 7 days per week certainly makes sense. Jean?
All right, I'll drop the gate, although I think you're all mistaken about that, but I want to make another pitch for keeping number 9 the way it is. Please look that it starts for projects with residential units, because there's really a difference with residential units where people are living somewhere and have to go out and take the bus, as compared to I'm at work and I have to go take the bus home afterward. And when it's residential units, that's when people are like, where am I going to go on the weekend? Where am I going to go at night? So I wrote this not for a commercial place, but for a residential place where they want a TDM. And note too, they don't have to do number 9. They just have to choose 2 or 3 of these to meet the requirements. So I think number 9 needs to be fairly strict if we're going to use it, because it is for residences. So I will make another pitch to keep it the way I wrote it, because if they're not near enough to a bus stop, if the bus doesn't run after 4 in the afternoon, it's not really going to be good for residences. And they can just meet the criteria for TDM by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. They just don't have to use number 9. So I think it's important to put it in there.
So we still have a full hearing to go through. I think, I hear what you're saying, and I know I'd like to think about that one a little more personally as to the frequency. The only one that I will note that was added to this was Steve proposed charging facilities for e-bikes, and I would assume scooters and, other non-electric, non-automobile transportation. Is that correct? That was your other proposal?
Yeah, and the issue with e-bike batteries is some of them have questionable provenance and they are explosive prone. Or they are large lithium batteries, and there is a high hazard. In some municipalities, there is pushback against having residents, bring the batteries up to their place, whether or not, the question is whether or not they're being charged in a safe manner. So, if you put a power receptacle by each bike or each pair of bike, that's a much safer environment. Or, another option which is common are charging lockers, which are, they have plugs on the inside and they're fireproof.
Any thoughts on that proposal to add an additional?
I'm fine with that because the place doesn't have to choose to do it if
Correct.
it doesn't want to do it.
Yes.
Okay. Great. We can certainly keep debating 9, or I think we still have several to run through, unless there's any specific additional feedback that we want to provide on the proposed language from Jean for number 9. Okay, so we'll circle back to that when we have the hearing on this article. Thank you, Jean, by the way, for all of the updates. That was very helpful for the discussion this evening. We'll now move to Article C, and I'll turn this over to Claire. I think this one's pretty straightforward.
Article C is an article and just delete inland wetlands. This is a pretty straightforward article. It was one that was attempted last year at town meeting. It was one that was brought up again by Conservation Commission, Inspectional Services, and the Environmental Planner as something jurisdictional area that is completely covered by the Conservation Commission at this point, and the work that they do. And the Inland Wetland Overlay District is found to be in practice to be really inapplicable when trying to evaluate projects. It is almost impossible to map. And in fact, I don't believe that there is an existing map of the district, which is one of the issues. But several other municipalities have gone through the process of deleting their inland wetland district, given the overlap with the Conservation Commission in those municipalities as well.
Great. And we do have confirmation that there will be members of the commission who will be able to speak to this at town meeting.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Any discussion on the proposed language from the board, starting with Jean?
No, I mean, I think it's fine. I'll just add, I think it would be really helpful to have the chair of the ZBA as well as one of the conservation commissioners speak at town meeting about this, because it was the ZBA that asked us last year because they found it impossible to use when situations came in front of them. And I think the conservation commissioner can then explain that a lot of jurisdictions adopted these inland wetland district zoning before the state had a good Wetland Protection Act. Now the state has one, and Arlington also has a very robust wetland protection regulations on top of it. But I think we really need the ZBA and a conservation commissioner there to explain this to town meeting so that everybody understands that this is not only unnecessary but counterproductive.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Steve, any additional thoughts?
Fine by me.
Jana?
I'm good with it.
Ken?
No.
All right. Let's move to Article D, which is the definition of lot coverage, which was an article proposed by the ZBA and taken up by the ARB. I'll turn it over to Claire.
Great, thank you. We worked with the ZBA, staff worked with the ZBA on this draft motion. Essentially, it is to amend definitions to better define or to place the definition of lot coverage itself into the bylaw.
Great, thank you. Jean?
Looks good to me.
Steve?
Fine by me.
Jana?
Fine by me.
Ken?
No issues.
All right. Article E, parking in residential districts. This is another amendment proposed by the ZBA and taken up at their request by the redevelopment board. Turn it over to Claire.
Great. Vicki, we went through this, worked with Christian Klein and others on this main motion language. I don't know, Jean, if you went through this one as well?
Yeah,
Okay.
if I could. Yeah, after I saw the language, I had some questions about it, and I had some emails back and forth with Christian and with Pat Hanlon, the vice chair of the ZBA, to try to get answers. And the questions included in the earlier, in the current draft, some of the requirements just applied to the R0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 districts, and some applied to all. And yet they dropped it so it applied to all, and I think they just didn't think that through. And then there are a couple other questions I had that we discussed back and forth and didn't come to resolution. Then I went out of town and forgot about it. and when I got back and I saw it was on the agenda, I said, oh, I'd better do something about it. So I wrote this and I sent it to them, and Christian emailed me today and he said, this is good. And I said I would report to him that he finds this an acceptable way to go about doing it. It resolved the issues that we had with it.
Great, thank you so much, Jean. Steve?
So I think it is far clearer than the 6110 we have today. And yeah, there's, in terms of, if I could make a substantive change or consider one, I would like to look at the provision that allows parking the longer of 2 front yards on lots that are under 6,000 feet. I wouldn't mind seeing that on all lots, just for the sake of avoiding driveway moats and reducing impervious surface. Pavement. But I'm okay with leaving it as is for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I should mention that the ZBA did not raise that as an issue, so I didn't go beyond what substantively they wanted to change.
Do you have any thoughts on what Steve proposed?
I think we should wait till next year and talk to the ZBA because they do this the most.
Fair enough. Shayna?
I'm fine with this as proposed by Jean.
Ken?
Yes, same here.
Great. So I will add to future reviewing lots under 6,000 square feet parking requirements for the ZBA. And that's for dual frontage lots, correct?
Yes.
Corner lots.
Corner lots. All right, thank you both. So the next article we have is Article F, screening and buffer requirements. And Clara, I will turn it over to you.
Great, fantastic. This one is interesting. It is somewhat of an administrative correction, but also amending the screening and buffer requirements in the zoning bylaw to see if the town will vote to remove duplicate material, combine certain sections, delete certain sections, revise certain sections for clarity, remove a subsection to a different section, and amend a reference in section 5.6.2. This is what we were able to come up with for main motion language that would achieve the warrant article, the activity described in the warrant article, and I believe this was also worked on by Mr. Klein with others on the board.
Great, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Jean.
I had no comments. Marissa and I had worked out this language ahead of time.
Great, thank you. Steve?
There's, as far as a cleanup measure, I think this is fine as is. In the future, we might want to look at the actual buffer distances being as they're proposed, compared to uses that are currently allowed in the B&I districts. The screening requirements typically far exceed required yard setbacks, which it's a little bit of an incongruity, but I mean, in practice, it's worked out, so to speak.
making a note of that.
Yeah, our purpose here was just to get rid of all the duplication, not to add any substantive changes.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Great, I made a note of that for the future. Shayna?
As a cleanup measure, I think this is great and have nothing further.
Great. Kim?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Steve. I think this is just a cleanup and let's address the distances next year.
Great, thank you very much. Let's move to Article G, which is the Redevelopment Board jurisdiction relative to the Minuteman Bikeway. I'll turn it over to Claire.
Great. This is a main motion, warrant article that was suggested by the board, who over the last summer, over the last year or so, had seen residential projects that were coming in front of the board purely because of their location on the Minuteman Bikeway. This adds language that removes the board authority over certain projects, leaving their jurisdiction over the Minuteman Bikeway unless the site is located in R1 or R2 district, contains a single-family, two-family, or duplex dwelling, whereas the applicable special permit granting authority would be the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Great, thank you very much. Jean, I'll turn it over to you.
I just made some minor wording changes that I thought were needed for clarity. For example, since it's about construction, reconstruction, it's not contains, it should be concerns because that directly applies. And it's not whereas, it should be where, and then where there is, it shall be. So I just did some, minor grammatical changes.
Great, thank you. Steve?
I'm fine with Mr. Benson's amendment.
Shayna?
I am as well.
Kim?
Yeah, same here.
All right. Looks good. The next is Article H. I will turn this, let's take H and I together, and I'll turn these over to Claire.
So H and I are the rezoning of B1 parcels to B2A to allow for greater flexibility for potential redevelopment. There are two articles that are associated with, there are two articles associated with this larger issue. One is the rezoning article, and then one is the zoning map adoption once the B1 zoning has been approved. This was two articles were put in at the direction of town council. As I've said previously, as a belts and suspenders sort of activity here. I think the thing about the B1 parcel rezoning that I like to pose to the board for discussion is we are motioning to rezone B1 to B2A for any B1 parcel that is greater than 5,000 square feet, which is the minimum parcel size in the B2A. I don't, the board never discussed this. It's something that staff sort of, determined was a way to better apply. I think B2A and have to be more actionable, while not completely eliminating the B1 zone, but certainly the board can discuss and decide.
Great, thank you very much. Jean, we'll start with you.
I think the 5,000 square foot limit makes perfect sense. Thank you, Claire. My only comment in looking at the map is that there are a handful of B1 parcels that are not on Mass Ave, Mill Street, Summer Street, and Broadway. And if you look at the definition of B2A, it says located along Mass Ave, Mill Street, Summer Street, and Broadway. And so I think it makes sense for a couple of reasons. That one of them, I think there are about 4 on Chestnut Street and a couple on Swan and a couple other places. I would keep them in the B1. And I'd keep them in the B1 partially because they're not in the definition of B2A, but also a lot of them are on smaller streets where I think keeping them in B1 I think is more appropriate with the street and the streetscape. So I like the 5,000 square foot thing, but I would also leave in the B1 the ones that are not on Mass Avenue Street, Summer Street, or Broadway.
Thank you, Jean.
Oh, and I had one other thought. There's one use that's allowed in B1 that's not allowed in B2A, if I read the page correctly in the zoning bylaw, and that's community center. And my thought was that we should also amend the use table to allow community center in B2A the same way it is in B1 by special permit.
Great, thank you. I'll actually jump in next. I'm not sure that square footage of the lot is the right barometer for us to use for deciding which of these to move into the B2A versus the B1. Part of what we're trying to deal with here is the Swiss cheese of zoning, if you will, that we currently are saddled with, and the fact that there were some rather arbitrary decisions made around the existing underlying zoning, and rather than thinking about contiguous lots. And my concern is that if we leave out some of these smaller parcels that are now going to create more discontinuity between the B2A and the B1, hopping back and forth, which we have in several locations if we use that as our gate, if you will, for migrating some of these over, that we are not really putting our best foot forward to correct the situation that we're currently in. So I would actually prefer to instead look at what the adjacent zoning is, and I would rather include those smaller parcels. I would rather see more added to the B2A where it makes sense, where we might be hopping a parcel or two simply because of the size. Knowing that, again, several projects have come in front of us recently where they are creatively finding opportunities to combine small parcels for the better of the project. So I wanted to propose that for discussion. And Steve, I know you had your hand up. I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, so in terms of when thinking about this, I think it's reasonable to include ones that are on the corridors, but I also think it would be reasonable to include B1 parcels that are adjacent to either an existing B2A, a B5, a B4, or an I district. And if you taking those together, there are not that many B1s that fall outside of that category. I think Swan Place is the one that comes to mind. I would also be okay with amending the definition so that instead of saying the district is located on, we say the district is predominantly located on, or something to that effect. Thank you.
Great, Shana?
I am largely in agreement with both Rachel and Steve. I think Jean's proposal of adding community centers to the B2 district is a great idea.
Ken?
I pretty much agree with you guys, except for one thing that Jean has on. You said the 6 parcels on Chestnut Street that's right now zoned as B1. I would just like to keep those, change those to B2A too, just because it is not a small street, and it's in a very populated area. I mean, right across the street is a huge church, the school there, cemetery's right behind it. I mean, it's not a small single-family resident area there. I just don't see it that way. So I would propose maybe we keep that in, that's all.
So may I respond?
Yes, of course.
I think if we do that, and I think that makes sense, then we should take up Steve's idea to amend the overall definition to say predominantly on those streets. I agree with Rachel about if one of less than 5,000 square feet is contiguous to a B2A, we might as well convert it to a B2A also. But if it's contiguous to another B1, we should keep it as a B1, I'd suggest. And I'm not sure about Steve's suggestion about things that are off the major streets, if they're contiguous to a B2A, because then you're getting into the side streets where, you know, there is the natural sort of smaller buildings on the side streets. So I'd be more inclined to leave them as B1s.
So, can we look, for example, on the maps that we have here, what we have highlighted in green and that are outlined in bold are those that you are suggesting to rezone, correct? So for example, on just the 1007 to 1171 Mass Ave, for example, that map, there's one B1 parcel in between three others. Are we suggesting that would not, that falls under 5,000 square feet, so that's why that one?
That's correct.
Right,
Right.
so,
So that's the way.
right, so, you know, if that's moving to B2A, that we would add, correct? If we could just go by the maps, I just want to make sure we're all saying the same thing because I'm not quite sure that we are. Let's start it with the first map.
Thank you.
Which is the first map?
I just went with that one because that was,
51, I think. of the-
so 43 to 89 Mass Ave.
Okay.
So for example, on this map, we have 4 parcels that are being moved to B1 and 6 that are not. I think it's creating more of a discontinuity to not include the smaller parcels here on Mass Ave, 67, 63. And the other corner lot that just says 0 lot.
Yes.
So the question is then, do we include the others across the street? One is next to a B4. I mean, to me, again, if it's on Mass Ave and it is in this zone, they should all be converted rather than leaving one hanging in the way that we're currently struggling with right now.
I agree with you.
I agree.
Yes, I
Yes.
agree.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all saying the same thing there.
So if I could ask on this same map, between, I think it's 5860 and 4850, it does not appear to be a B1. It's just it's something else altogether. Are we leaving that alone for now? There appears to be either that's a
Must be an
partial
R because it
parcel
doesn't
or-
have a B.
So
So I think
we'll
there's
just
still
leave that
some map.
alone.
work to do. And again, that's not, assuming that that is not a B1, that would not be part of this scope of this article. But, you know, I think there's definitely still map work.
Well, and
done.
49 to 50, or 48 to 50, if I'm reading this correct, is next to a before. So that would make certain sense to convert that to a before.
Yeah, I mean,
B2A,
I would do
mean.
everything that's in green on this map here.
Including 89 across Teal Street?
Including 89.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion here?
Yes.
Can we, all the properties that touch the screen area here, we just fill in with the letter of what it's zoned for, so we do know it's an R or it's an R3, R4,
That would be helpful, yeah.
and then we exactly see what it's zoned for.
Sure.
I was gonna do that, but I just ran out of time. And then maybe if we get a Google view of just that area, then associated with that, so it's a group, it'd be easier to digest here, and then also maybe later on in town meeting.
Okay.
So we have, you know, this is actually what it is. Not everybody's gonna know every little thing, but if you know it, they don't actually know what we're talking about.
Right, and you know, I think just on this first map, we have our green zone overlapping the parcel across the street from 58 to 60, but I'm assuming that's not a B parcel since it's not labeled.
There's a discrepancy, whether it's E2 or E1 or R2. It's a
Okay.
GIS discrepancy, not a,
Okay,
we're working on it.
okay. So that's a to be determined. So taking that same, so I think we have two maps that are 43 to 48. So then the next map, I think, is 221 to 298, and all of those B1s are already included. The next we have is 305 to 418, and again, I would propose that we add in the B1 parcels that have been skipped on this map, unless there is any objection.
Nope.
Okay,
Can I just mention
please.
that on this map, there are two proposed, one on Avon Place, one on Palmer Street, that don't front Mass Ave, that are currently B1. And I'm just wondering whether we should keep them as B1.
Gee, what map are you looking at?
305
to 418 Mass Ave. Now, they're adjacent, abutting parcels on Mass Ave.
So I think the one on,
Keep going.
so it's not Avon, it's whatever the next, Palmer. Two.
Or Whittemore.
Two of the three abutting parcels are B1 and going into the district, and so it's sort of surrounded on most sides, and I would advocate putting that in. It's
You know, I mean, the one disadvantage I see to doing that, I'm not sure when, if ever, some of these parcels will get redeveloped. But if they're on the side street and they're next to a residence, I think there's some, I'm leaning toward keeping them as B1 because they help the transition to the residential zone.
I think that makes sense. I also think it makes sense for us to go out and look at these parcels in question, obviously before we take our final vote.
Although, I mean, I'm not sure when Claire has to send out all the letters to all the abutters, so I don't know how much time we have to do that.
We're working on it right now. It's sooner rather than later, though.
I would rather include them and remove them.
I'm okay with that.
I also concur.
Agreed.
I don't know, I just don't, I guess I just don't like the idea of sending somebody a letter from town certified, or whatever we have to say it, that says, we're gonna change the zoning on your property, and then they show up and we say, oops, we changed our mind, we're not gonna do that.
It's not an oops, I mean, we have
Well,
more due diligence to do.
Well, I
Yeah.
know, but
But if we change our mind later on, gee, it's too late to notify them. So
well,
by doing that right now, we already limit ourselves.
I understand that, I'm just sort of leaning on the side of caution with these. And there aren't that many, so I think the idea of not doing, like, the one on Whittemore and the one on Palmer is not, in this case, a big deal to say we're not gonna do them.
I actually disagree. I think they are parcels that open up the surrounding parcels. They square off and open up the surrounding parcels, and by omitting them, you make the opportunities for the surrounding parcels more limited.
Well, I'm not gonna block this if everybody else wants to include them.
Are there any other concerns with including them? It sounds like there is some consensus for including them,
Including them.
at least,
Yeah,
yes.
well, for now.
Okay. The next map is 734 to 800. And I think there was a request to leave those on Swan Place as B1. I just want to make sure, so if we include those that are missing,
Well, not only
that are
Swan, but
above Mass
also,
Ave.
there's also Water Street and Center Street.
So regarding Central Street and Swan Place, there's a row of them that abut B5.
Yes.
And likewise for Water Street, the opposite side of the street is also B5. So, I mean, to me, B2A seems appropriate there.
Okay, I would agree. So let's leave those in, or add those in. And then we have the one missing parcel in 1007 to 1171 Mass Ave that we'll add back in. Then we have 1471 to 1530 Mass Ave. This is another area where we're jumping back and forth across parcels that are sandwiched between B4 and B2A, that I think all should be B2A, unless there's any objection.
So,
No objection.
Okay,
well, my only question is, are these in the area for the Arlington Heights zoning review? And if they are, would it make more sense to save them for that review rather than change them now?
if that doesn't pass, then we still have a discontinuity.
True. Okay.
I agree with you fundamentally that to rezone twice is a challenge. But I think if we're, going to go down this route this year, we should be consistent. The next map, I don't think there was anything that was left out. This is Chestnut Street, and I think that's it. All right, thank you.
So we agreed that we're gonna go ahead and put zoning areas on all adjacent properties next to the green zone, and we include some photographs, aerials of this to capture a few of this, and we will, as a board, go and visit all these sites
Yes,
in,
between now and the hearing date.
don't they have to be noticed up, or we have to be within a week or 2 weeks, or?
Yes, the town will send the notices, but before the hearing, the board will need to complete our due diligence
Okay.
ahead of the hearing.
Yep.
Any questions, Claire, or any additional comments on the discussion? Great,
Can I just ask a question?
please.
On the notices, on the notices that go out, is there a phone number that people can call if they have questions?
Yes,
Okay,
it's mine.
it's yours?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. Any other discussion on the ARB town meeting warrant articles? Great. With that, we will move to our next agenda item, which is open forum. So any member of the public who has joined us this evening who would like to speak, if you could please raise your hand. When I call on you, you will have up to 2 minutes to address the board. We won't engage in a back and forth discussion. I will take questions and we will attempt to answer any questions you all might have at the end. As I call on you to speak, could you please introduce yourselves by first, last name, and address? And we'll go ahead and open forum. I believe you had your hand up to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't know if you've yet seen it, but I've also filed an article called Affordable Housing Overlay, and I think it accords with some of the comments that came from the board about the previous one. In that, and again, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but we were looking at it very short. The idea is that affordable housing would be allowed in any district except the industrial and open space. But the structure must follow whatever the zoning regulations are in that particular district. So if it's R1, it's 25-foot setback, 2.5 stories, etc. Side yards, all that stuff. Parking requirements be the same, so that it doesn't change the appearance of the neighborhood or building towering over other people's houses. And you talked about sustainability and so on. It specifically cannot overshadow somebody's solar panels or potential solar panels. Don't cut down mature trees. Don't destroy historic houses. So it's designed to fit in to the neighborhoods as we now know them. And so the only difference would be is that you may have more people or more units within, hopefully the same buildings as exist there now.
Great, thank you very much. And for the record, if I could just ask you to state your name and address, that's okay.
John Worden, 27 Jason Street, senior member of town meeting for 55 years.
Great, thank you. We look forward to seeing your warrant article. Much appreciated. Next, yes.
We now have in Triple Place. I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification in Article E about the location of parking spaces. The current language reads in section A1, off-street parking spaces shall not be permitted in the area between the front lot line and the minimum front setback except on a driveway not exceeding 40 feet width leading to the required parking spaces. That final clause from except on a driveway through required parking spaces has now been struck. Does this mean that we would no longer see housing with driveways leading to garage unders as in the duplex style that is so common around town? Thank you.
Great, thank you. We will address that one when we have finished public comment. Thank you. Anyone else? Please.
This is Marina Popova. I'm living at 255 Ridge Street.
I apologize.
That's me.
Unclear. This is new equipment for us this evening.
So what,
Yeah, I just have a question.
you're right under a speaker, so I'd suggest moving a little to your left or right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Steve.
What I do?
Good to have
And hold it like
tech
this.
Like I'm drinking.
I'll restart your time. Go ahead.
So I actually had a comment about the transportation law, on the specifically what qualifies as a good, basically a determination of whether it is a good, I guess, criteria for, to count as transportation related right there. So I really like the idea of having both their distance and the frequency of the bus, because I think that the frequency of the bus is actually crucial. Because, I mean, everything else is kind of irrelevant. Whether you're close to a line, not close to a line, it doesn't matter if when you get there is no bus. So that's, I kind of just wanted to say that it's really, really important. And I'm always, always happy to take the 77 bus because I know that I can rely on it. And actually for that one, I'm willing to walk much longer. I will walk the whole mile, but I know that when I get there in 5 minutes, I'm actually going to get that bus. So I'm doing that sometimes, and my kids are doing that. But if I have to walk somewhere and wait for 3:50, that's not going to happen. So then I'm not just going to drive to them. So I would just ask you to please consider again to keep the frequency there if possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else this evening? All right, so thank you all. With that, we will close open public forum. With regard to the question on parking spaces, Jean, can I turn that one over to you?
I don't think we made any substantive change about that. We moved a lot of the requirements to different paragraphs so they read better, but it still says a driveway leading to off-street parking cannot exceed 20 feet in width and cannot be closer, we added this, 20 feet to an intersection. Further, a driveway leading to off-street parking on a lot cannot exceed a 15% downward slope. Exact language that was there before. The other thing we did is, it used to say off-street parking. We changed it to required off-street parking spaces. So it was easier to say you have to have those required spaces. And then it doesn't stop anyone from doing what they do now, which is parking in their driveway. That stays the same. So I don't think we changed that at all. We were being responsive to the ZBA on this.
Great, thank you very much for the clarification, Jean. All right, with that, we will move to our next agenda item, which is new business, and I will turn it over to Claire.
Great, thank you. I wanted to speak briefly about a home rule petition that is going to be part of the warrant for this town meeting that amends the Town Manager Act to more clearly establish that the ARB serves as the board of survey for the town. And I didn't want the board to see this home rule petition and not, understand what we were doing. And hence I forwarded the privileged information from the law department to you all about, yes, indeed, the ARB being established as the board of survey. And in fact, that will be dealt with in the Town Manager Act at this next town meeting. Now, what that means from the board and for DPCD, we are still looking at it. We have an interdepartmental meeting set up in the next 2 weeks to go over procedure, operations, how this would actually play out. We maybe have a pending application related to your responsibility as the board of survey. Maybe coming, but I think the department is working to really be able to summarize and operationalize the procedures around what exactly that means for this board. So I thank you for your patience. There will be more information forthcoming.
Great. Any questions? Steve? Jean?
Yeah, I appreciated getting that, and I emailed back to Claire. I always thought we were the Board of Surveying. So it was interesting that we are, except there's some provision somewhere that seems to contradict everything else. So I think it's a really good idea to clear that up. And we haven't, at least during my 8 years here, we have not acted as the Board of Survey once, even though there are a couple times when I was wondering why we didn't, and I still have to have a conversation with town council about that.
Great. Shayna?
Nothing.
Okay. All right. Any other new business?
Yes.
Claire? Sorry, I just want to check with
No,
Claire. Do you
excuse
have
me,
any?
this time.
Okay. Steve?
This is actually a question for staff. Are we in the process of forming a beautification committee? And if so, can you talk about that? Thank you.
There have been some, thank you for bringing that up. There have been some very initial emails back in the week. There is a beautification committee or something like it that has already been established. I think what we are looking to do is sort of resurrect that committee and make them more functional and more impactful. Yes, we're looking to enhance a committee that sort of already exists, and I can certainly report back to this board about what that looks like and what that means.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Jean?
Nothing.
Shayna?
Nothing.
Ken?
Nothing.
All right. So with that, I will see if there's a motion to adjourn.
So motion.
Second,
Take a vote, starting with Steve,
Yes.
Jean,
yes.
Shayna,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for joining us.